Excelentísimas e ilustrísimas autoridades, señoras y señores, como presidente de Nueva Economía Forum, tengo el honor de darles la bienvenida al Foro de la Nueva Economía, en el que tenemos la gran satisfacción de poder contar de nuevo con el señor Martin Schulz, Presidente del Parlamento Europeo. Un agradecimiento especial al propio señor Schulz, que ha encontrado tiempo para comer con nosotros a pesar de un intenso programa que está desarrollando durante su visita de trabajo a Madrid. Ayer se reunió con el presidente del Gobierno y esta mañana ha sido recibido en audiencia por Su Majestad el Rey. Esta tarde se encontrará con el secretario general del PSOE, Pedro Sánchez, y ha estado presente en diversos medios de comunicación. El presidente Schulz ya estuvo con nosotros en mayo de 2012, poco después de ser elegido presidente del Parlamento Europeo, cuando no era tan conocido como lo es ahora. Su primera visita a España coincidió con la fase más dura de la crisis y en aquel momento sus mensajes se centraron en cómo capear el enorme temporal al que estaban haciendo frente Europa en general y España en particular. 3 años después, el señor Schulz vuelve a esta tribuna tras haber sido elegido presidente del Parlamento, de nuevo, y habiéndose convertido sin duda en una de las figuras claves del presente y del futuro de la Unión Europea. Son muchísimos los que consideran que Martin Schulz ha sido la primera persona en romper el molde de lo que hasta hace poco era la presidencia del Parlamento Europeo, convirtiendo un cargo muy institucional en uno mucho más político y sin el cual no se explica el aumento considerable de la influencia de la Cámara Parlamentaria Europea en los asuntos comunitarios. Si el presidente de la Comisión Europea es hoy Jean-Claude Juncker y no un oscuro político repescado a última hora para lograr el acuerdo de los 28 Estados miembros, es en buena parte gracias a Martin Schulz, que junto con aliados en otros partidos europeos tuvo la valentía de hacer una lectura más política del Tratado de Lisboa y convertir las elecciones al Parlamento Europeo en el instrumento para que los ciudadanos pudieran decidir quién había de ser el próximo presidente de la Comisión Europea. Su familia política, la socialdemocracia europea, no ganó las elecciones, como saben ustedes, pero se convirtió inmediatamente en el socio de coalición imprescindible para que Juncker pudiera alcanzar la presidencia de la Comisión. Desde ese momento, mucha gente ve el dúo Juncker-Schulz como la explicación a muchas de las cosas que desde hace unos meses parecen estar cambiando en Bruselas. Amigo personal de François Hollande, interlocutor directo de Angela Merkel, no es ningún secreto para nadie que Schulz, al que en algunas ocasiones se ha calificado como el otro alemán, ha jugado y juega un papel importante en el acercamiento de la visión europea de las dos principales potencias europeas en temas como el abandono de la política de austeridad a ultranza o la negociación del pago de la deuda con el nuevo gobierno griego de Alexis Tsipras, con quien Schulz mantiene también buenas relaciones hace al menos 5 años. Estamos seguros de que en los próximos minutos el presidente Schulz nos hará una descripción inteligente y de primera mano de la situación política y económica que atraviesa la Unión Europea. Sin duda mejor que en 2012, pero en un momento en el que la desconfianza en las instituciones, el aumento de los populismos o las tensiones creadas por la victoria de Syriza en las elecciones griegas vuelven a tensar la cuerda a nivel europeo. Para el Foro de la Nueva Economía es un gran honor recibir una vez más al presidente Schulz, el presidente del Parlamento Europeo. Querido amigo, la tribuna es suya.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much, Chairman, for your nice words, for your warm welcome. I was surprised to hear some of your observations that I'm a colleague of Angela Merkel She is the Chancellor of my country. And we try to live in a mutual respect. But I must admit that there are some slight different opinions about the one or another point between the Chancellor of Germany and me. But on an international level, on the European level, as President of the European Parliament, it's quite clear that I have to cooperate, and I cooperate intensively with Angela Merkel to find the necessary means and the way out of the crisis in which the European Union for the time being still is. And therefore, thank you very much for the invitation, for the second invitation to address your prestigious assembly here. It's for me an honor. And it is for me also a pleasure to meet with you. Amongst you, a lot of friends I used to work very long time together with them as colleagues in the European Parliament, and it's for me an enormous pleasure to meet also with one of my predecessors in the European Parliament, and therefore I think you will accept that amongst all this prestigious personality present here, I spend a warm greeting to my fellow predecessor and friend, Enrique Baron Crespo. It's an enormous pleasure for me to meet with you, Enrique, here in Madrid. Ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to be brief, maximum 15 minutes. That means half a minute for the most urgent problems of the European Union, 30 or 35 ones. So to be as brief as possible and to be outspoken in the same time, I have to focus on the most urgent and most important problems of the European Union. Above all, I think we need economic recovery in Europe. We need a relaunch of the European economy. And therefore, I'm very happy that since the European election, Chairman, you raised the cooperation between Juncker and me. Since the European election, we are on a new way in Europe, not yet visible and not yet tangible for everybody, but this philosophy which was ruling in the European Union a very long time, that only cuts in public budgets will lead immediately to the regain of trust of investors. We practice it during years and years. We cut in public budgets, but we didn't win the investors to get to Europe and to invest. Because it was, in my eyes, not the right way. The combination between two strategies. On one hand, to reduce sovereign debt, a sustainable management of the sovereign debt and the annual budgets is absolutely necessary and unavoidable. And I say this as a man who belongs to the left wing in Europe. And I know that it is often not well perceived on the left wing of the European spectrum. Yes, we must reduce the sovereign debt. We must manage sustainably public budgets because it is a question of solidarity, solidarity between generations. I don't want to see my children and their children paying my debt. Therefore, the management of public budgets and sovereign debts is a question also of solidarity. But you must not be a Harvard professor in economy to understand that no public budget will ever ascend without growth and employment. And therefore, the combination between these two strategies, to invest in growth and to manage the sovereign debt on the other hand, is the right way. And therefore, the Juncker plan of 315 billion euros to invest in the European economy is a reasonable project. And the decision of Jean-Claude Juncker's Commission, under the influence, I'm very prudent, under the influence of the European Parliament, to decide not to oblige those countries who put money in the investment fund to calculate that money in their national annual deficit criteria is the right decision. It was highly controversial because we had an uploaded ideological debate that this is a violation of the Stability Pact. No, it is not. The Stability Pact has a title which is not Stability Pact, it is Stability and Growth Pact. And investments in growth should not be killed by an ideological interpretation of the Stability Pact. Therefore, the way of Juncker's plan, the strategy to combine those countries who put the money on the table for the investment should not be punished in their national budget because they put that money on the table is the right way. It is a small step to go in a new direction, that growth is key for all the other items. There are a lot of, in this room, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of men and women coming from the economy, you know, for growth, for the modernization, you need to invest first, and then the efforts on the middle and long run will come. And we should, in finding recovery of our economy, not underestimate two other elements we are fighting for the time being. The first one is tax evasion and tax fraud. It is inadmissible that ordinary taxpayers pay everything. And when I speak about ordinary taxpayers, I'm not speaking about only workers, employees, and civil servants. Especially the medium and small enterprises pay the highest amount of taxes in the member states. And I find it absolutely unfair and unjust that multinational trusts make billions of profits and don't pay taxes because they can bring their money to tax havens. Therefore, the fight against tax fraud and tax evasion is an improvement of the revenue side of the public budgets, which helps us to generate the necessary money for investment, for strategic investments, and in growth, and the fight against unemployment of young men and women. And the second element of our strategy is that we must understand that the trust of citizens to the political system depends not from promises on a long run, that in 2020 we will manage the problem of unemployment. This is for somebody, for parents, for example, who have invested their whole life in their children, who made all sacrifices for a good education for their children, who themselves as parents, as couples said, nothing for us, everything for the children, for their future. And they see that at the end of their engagements and the education of their children, our society has only one message. We have 700 billion euros to stabilize the banking system, but we have no place for your children. How can I expect that such people have trust to our system? Therefore, the fight against unemployment is not a fight in 2020. It is a fight now. And therefore, I urge Jean-Claude Juncker, and I hope he will find a majority in his Commission, and we will find a majority in the European Parliament, to link the investments of the Juncker plan to a short-term fight against unemployment. Concretely, all the enterprises who invest and get a support out of the Juncker plan, if they employ in the same moment people, they should get a privilege on the interest rates or on the reimbursement time or even a direct aid. And if they employ people longer for 1 year, they should even get more support. Because if we will not in a foreseeable time bring more young people to a sustainable long-term job, I fear high risks for the security and democracy in Europe. Because the hopelessness and the disappointment which is ruling in a part of our member states is dangerous for our democracy. And to get back to a sustainable economic development, another collateral effect of the banking crisis, which was at the source of the problems we face today, is the credit crunch, especially for small and medium enterprises. A lot of you here in the room know about what I'm speaking. We have enormous ideas. There is a lot of very competent people in the smaller and medium enterprises with ideas how to invest, how to develop, how to present new services, new goods, new products, how to invest in research and technology to remain to be competent and competitive with other parts of the world or within the European single market. And when I speak with them, when I discuss with them here in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, in Portugal, in other countries, I get in an average always the same answer. We have enough ideas. We could also employ people, but our problem is access to credits. And therefore, to overcome the credit crunch, in case of necessity, to build out of the European Investment Bank a risk capital bank for medium and smaller enterprises. And if the European Investment Bank, the institution which should manage the Juncker plan, tells me, yeah, if we are too flexible with the small and medium enterprises, we bring in risk our AAA rating. Yeah. Then my answer is, then I can go to the Deutsche Bank. I must not ask you. The credit crunch is one of the biggest problems for growth and employment. Therefore, I think we have to overcome it here in Spain. The problem is, if you allow to say this, in addition to all the other countries, also quite understandable the problem that this country was affected strongly, and perhaps stronger than other countries, by a certain kind of irresponsible speculation in the banking sector. 10 years ago, when I came for the first time in an official function of the European Parliament to Spain in 2004, everybody here in Madrid spoke to me about the Iberic tiger. Spain had a growing economy, and Spain had especially a stronger national budget than my country, Germany. The Spain deficit was lower than in Germany. But Spanish taxpayers had to pay for an unjust and unfair system. Speculators speculate and make billions of profits and don't pay taxes. And when the same speculators make billions of losses, the taxpayers have to pay for them. This is not a fair and just system. And therefore, I understand people who are worried about that development. And this is not a responsibility of one or another government. This is the responsibility of all of us to bring in the banking union risk and responsibility back to the same hand. Those who risk must be responsible, and the risks should be limited and brought under control. Ladies and gentlemen, recovery, unemployment, and taxation are the three key challenges for the next coming years. And I want to say a last word about Greece. The Greek government made some remarks about Spain and Portugal. Look, those who know me a little bit nearer know that I'm a strong, committed politician from the left side. I'm a Social Democrat of Germany. I'm a member of the executive board of the German Social Democratic Party. Okay, I have my left-wing conviction, but I'm also the representative of a transnational institution. And the moment I get an institutional responsibility, I must be able to make the difference between my role as a party politician and my institutional role. And therefore my appeal is, the moment somebody enters the office of a prime minister, of a head of state, he cannot leave at the entrance his conviction. Nobody expects it. But he must be appropriated in his action to the role he has. If a left-wing party leader who is becoming prime minister, or a right-wing party leader who is prime minister, plays only the role of a party leader, he is not appropriated to the duty of his office. In Brussels, around the table, are sitting representatives of their countries and not representatives of their parties. And therefore, I think that Spain and Portugal have a high interest of Greek stability and not of Greek instability. We all have an interest of stability in Greece. And I want to alert all those who believe that a failure of Greece would not have an effect of all of us. It has an effect of the Eurozone as a whole. Therefore, we must have an interest. I have no interest in the success of a party which is running against me, but have a high interest of the success of Greece. And therefore, I hope that we will manage the problems in Greece. We have now 4 months more time. That also in Greece we find the way to investments for growth and employment. And there are chances and options, like in your country. I think the energy union we will build, the community, the energy single market, is an enormous chance for those countries who could produce solar and wind energy. And on the Peloponnese, the sun is more shining than in northern Germany. This is, for us Germans, a pity, and for the Greeks, it is an enormous chance. And we should not underestimate that Greece in 2013 and 14 had record figures in tourism, which has a lot to do with the neighborhood, quite clear. In northern Africa or in Turkey, the situation is less stable than in previous times, and there are more tourists going to Greece. And the Greek tourist enterprises tell us, if we invest now in the hotels, if we invest in the transport between the islands, if we invest in the education of our employees, in the services, then we can make this sustainable in the next years. There are chances. And therefore, I think we all have an interest that Greece is stabilized, and in the next 4 months we will find the way for Greece to make it visible and understandable that there is a sustainable path in the next years for growth, and that this will make possible to continue to help Greece on one hand, but to include Greece independently from the majority in the parliament as a full-fledged member of the Eurozone on equal footing with the partners. And this is a mutual process which requires trust from both sides to each other, and therefore both sides have to act in a trustful way of mutual respect. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in turbulent times. And I'm a post-war, post-Second World War Western German. I'm born in 1955. And I could not imagine that I would ever in my life be in such a situation as we are today. I thought, I don't know how other men and women of my generation thought in the past, but I thought that the times of racism, of hate, of xenophobia, of anti-Semitism, the times of war, of threat, of fear were over. I knew it from the tales of my parents. My father was born in 1912 and my mother 1920. My father was a child in the First World War and a soldier in the Second World War. My eldest brother, born in 1945, was born in a cave under a destroyed house. And the youngest brother of my mother came back in 1945 from Russia. He was born in 1925. He had, as a young boy of 18 years, with his Nazi criminal army, to go to Russia. And he got back in 45 with 20 years, survived Russia. And then he died at the Belgium-German border because he was a specialist in landmines. This was, until the death of my mother, an element she was unable to speak about. She couldn't speak about. And what I learned was the biggest risk for us is exactly the demons of the 20th century. Hate, xenophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, and the fear of war and the fear of economic decline. And I thought all these ingredients of risks are disappeared in Europe. To say now and to see now, no, they haven't disappeared. They are there. And they threat all of us. They threat the stability of our society. Who here in the room could believe 25 years ago that we would really have the risk of war in Europe? Nobody. Why I conclude with this, my generation thought that this is history and will never arise, and that we are safe for every time, for always. This is wrong. Every time need the courage to say the truth, to look to the reality, and to find the best way. The best way is always to discuss controversially, but at the end, to find a compromise, which is a basis for common action. Therefore, the fight against each other, the fight of one country against another country, of one ideology against another one, is wrong. The spirit of Europe is transnational democracy, countries and nations across borders in common institutions, as a frame to balance the heterogeneous interests and to find at the end a compromise saving the face for everybody. Europe is not the problem. Europe is the solution. The question is not yes or no to Europe. The question is which kind of Europe we create. I'm in favor of a wealthy, democratic Europe which is based on mutual respect between countries and nations and citizens. It sounds perhaps very simple, and it is in reality very difficult. But in my eyes, it is wrong to say there is no alternative to Europe. There is an alternative to Europe. This is renationalization with all the risks I just described. Therefore, Europe is perhaps not in the best shape, but it is I'm deeply convinced, still today, economically, politically, culturally, the best thing we had in the last centuries on our continent. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Vamos a proceder al servicio de la comida. Les deseo buen provecho. Muchas gracias por su asistencia de nuevo. Por favor, señor Schulz, cuando usted quiera. Muchas gracias. Presidente, Jorge Domínguez, abriendo este coloquio, le pregunta qué futuro le augura al plan Juncker, teniendo en cuenta que la iniciativa privada está muy lejos de llegar al 90% del coste de los proyectos previsto inicialmente. ¿No cree usted que es necesario establecer un mecanismo que garantice un criterio de cierta equidad en el reparto de las inversiones y para evitar agravios y desequilibrios entre Estados miembros?
Should I answer immediately?
Sí, sí.
Yeah, I think the Juncker plan is a plan who should focus, first of all, of those countries who need more investment. To be quite clear, it is not a plan for Germany. It is a plan who should avoid imbalances in that way that it is focusing, first of all, of countries who need more investments. Secondly, the problem of the plan is that he calculates that the basic capital which is coming from the European budget on one hand and from national budgets on the other hand includes, when I said it in my introductory remarks, a very important element. Those countries who put money on the table for the investment fund should not be punished in that way that this money is calculated in the Stability Pact criteria. Means clearly, if Spain, for example, 1.5 billion puts in the fund, it is not calculated in the deficit evaluation of the European semester in the frame of the Stability and Growth Pact. Or it would become counterproductive if I want to invest in Spain and in the same time an investment supported by the Spanish state is on the other hand leading to a more and higher sovereign debt of Spain. In the eyes of the European Commission, it makes absolutely no sense. But the public money in the fund is perhaps around 25 billion euros. The leverage effect via the European Investment Bank is makes only the fund flying if there is sufficient attraction for private capital. And here is the open question. Is Europe a place where we can attract private investments? The Juncker Fund is at the end the idea to give a certain coverage for risks. Because one of the problems we have in Europe is this, I said it already, risk capital. This is this lack of risk capital, which is, by the way, especially, I repeat it, for small and medium enterprises, one of the biggest problems. And finally, the decision about the future of the pact is not about money. The decisive element is trust. If a Chinese high technology enterprise goes to the stock exchanges like Alibaba, they mobilize in one day 22 billion euros. 22 billion euros in one day. Why? Because investors trust to the Chinese market. What we try with the Juncker Fund is to convince investors it makes sense to invest in Europe because the economic potential of Europe is sufficient. Therefore, the future of the trust is not money. It is, the future of the fund is not money, it is trust. If we, with the fund, attract the trust of investors.
Gracias. Presidente, le agradeceré que en las próximas respuestas sea usted más breve, porque si no vamos a tocar a poco. José Ignacio Salafranca, que fue compañero suyo durante 20 años en el Parlamento Europeo, le pregunta si cree usted que el Parlamento Europeo está preparado para ratificar un eventual acuerdo entre la Unión Europea y Estados Unidos después de las actividades de la Agencia Nacional de Seguridad de los Estados Unidos. ¿Piensa usted que la revisión de los acuerdos entre la Unión Europea, México y Chile debería acelerarse y poder ponerle un carácter prioritario? Carlos Suárez le pregunta qué líneas rojas deberían establecerse en las negociaciones del tratado. Del tratado con Estados Unidos.
First of all, Chairman, these were 4 questions. And I try to be as brief as possible. TTIP, yes. NSA and PNR, we will see. And the agreements with Latin America, if it will have the same future like, for example, with Colombia and Peru, yes. Brief enough?
Falta la cuarta.
Yeah, Chile.
Líneas rojas.
Ah.
Las líneas rojas del tratado con
the red
Estados Unidos.
I think the ISDS question is the decisive question. The question of arbitrage committees. I don't know the exact English term. What's that the exact? Tribunales privadas. So this is the decisive question. My feeling is we will find an agreement with the Americans on that because Arbitrage, ja, habe ich da gesagt? I said it, Arbitrage. So, you know what I mean. I think the red line is a compromise between the Americans and us about the Arbitrage. And the Americans are open. We also, but it is not easy. I could enter more in the detail, but then the chairman will be angry with me.
Le he dado una magnífica coartada, presidente. Guillermo Olmo, del diario ABC, dice: el presidente Hollande habla de un cambio de orientación. Juncker impulsa un plan de inversiones. Draghi compra deuda. ¿Está Europa girando hacia el keynesismo por fin?
No.
Laura Prieto, de Sector 3 de Radio 5. El Parlamento Europeo, en su informe sobre la responsabilidad social, señala la importancia de implantar la responsabilidad social corporativa en las pymes, así como reforzar los vínculos entre ciudadanos, competitividad, innovación. ¿Qué pasos concretos se han dado en ese sentido? Francisco León dice: ¿podría detallar algo más sobre la propuesta de crear un banco de capital riesgo para pymes si el BEI sigue obstinado en restringir el acceso de las pequeñas empresas al crédito?
Yeah, I have already in my introduction spoken about that. I think the European Investment Bank should be developed in the direction of a risk capital bank. If you allow, Chairman, I give an example why it is so important. Young startups here in Madrid or in Berlin or in Lisbon or in Dublin, they have all the same problem. You know, these small enterprises in high-tech development. I met a lot of them in Lisbon just recently. They start a couple and a friend, 3 people, one idea. In 1 year's time, they have 15 people. 1 year later, they have 50. A year later, they have 100. And then they are to the turning point for 500,000, and they need 10 million. And then they go to the bank. And then the banks tell them, Basel III, which are the securities, 15 million. And then Google is coming, Amazon is coming, the Silicon Valley comes along and they come to us. You get money as much as you need, but we buy you. And we buy your knowledge and your capacity. And then you must speak to these young entrepreneurs. If they are, you ask them, what do you prefer, to stay in Madrid or to go to the Silicon Valley? They tell you, look around here, and Madrid is the most wonderful place of the world. I want to stay here. But nobody wants to keep me here. And therefore the answer is we need more than ever a risk capital culture in Europe. And if I speak about the risk capital culture, I add one thing, Chairman, with your permission. The Americans have a tradition. Idea, attempt, success, okay. Or idea, attempt, failure, okay, next idea. We Europeans, idea, attempt, success, okay. Idea, attempt, failure, lost for the rest of your life. If we will not change that strategy, if we will not change that culture, we have no chance in competition with other parts of the world. And therefore, I'm perhaps also prepared to change rules in our banking system. But this is, first of all, a responsibility of public investment financing to help young enterprises with the risk capital management.
Rogelio Pérez Bustamante, de la Universidad Rey Juan Carlos, dice: el paro juvenil en España y en Grecia alcanzan cifras superiores al 55% y requieren una solución europea. Y esa no se logra poniendo límites a la libertad de circulación y sigue haciendo reales las iniciativas transnacionales de empleo juvenil. Del Consejo Nacional de la Juventud en España, Ángel Gudiña dice: España es un país campeón en el desempleo juvenil. La garantía juvenil está muy bien, pero no parece que funcione. ¿Podría decirnos qué se puede hacer para que resulte más eficaz?
To the first question, which was more an observation, I agree. We can't limit free movement. This is completely silly. And the second question, or the second remark, I tried already in my introductory speech to show what I mean. First of all, we have mobilized in the budget of the European Union 6 billion euros for the fight against youth unemployment. And it was foreseen in the 7 years multi-annual budget. That means every year 1 billion. The idea of the heads of states and government of the member states of the European Union was to put on the budget lines 1 billion for the fight against youth unemployment in 2020. And I raised the question, I had the feeling I was in the wrong meeting. said, could you tell me what shall I do with $1 billion to fight against youth unemployment in 2020? Perhaps we speak then about the pension fund for the young men and women. That's such an idea. We anticipated it to 2014 and 15. And in 2014, 1% of the money we had in 2014, 3 billion euros for the youth guarantee, and 1% was used. 1%. So I would like to invite you to ask that question to the governments of the member states, because this is not the European Union which is responsible. Responsible are regional governments, national governments, local authorities. How is this possible? And I'm grateful for your question. I raised the question in the European Council of Heads of States and Governments that, please, ladies and gentlemen, this is the assembly of Mr. Rajoy and Ms. Merkel and Mr. Hollande. And I said, could you tell me why 1%? So we will ask our we make the money available, but we must also we must use the money. And this is a challenge for regional and local authorities and enterprises, by the way.
Daniel Herrero, de Europa Press, le pregunta si son suficientes 4 meses para que Grecia se estabilice. Y Pablo Alberto Sánchez, de Servimedia, le pregunta si necesitará Grecia un tercer rescate. ¿Y lo ve usted posible?
First question, 4 months, no. Second question, I think so. Also 4 months is not enough, and the third package, we will see.
Esther Sanz, Siete Iglesias, de La Razón, le pregunta qué le parece el avance de los populismos tanto dentro del Parlamento Europeo como en las futuras elecciones en el Reino Unido y también en España. ¿Conoce usted bien a Podemos y a quienes le representan en el Parlamento Europeo? ¿Ha tenido ocasión de ver si hay que tenerles tanto miedo?
Yeah, what should I think about populist parties? Populist parties are populists, and I'm not a populist. I try at the end to be not a populist. And if I am familiar with Podemos, what does it mean, familiar? I know them. I know Mr. Iglesias in the European, he ran against me for the presidency of the European Parliament. I won. And I listened to his speeches in the European Parliament, and I know the things he is against. I'm waiting for the things he is in favor. So,
Andrea Díez, de Euranet Plus España, dice, ¿cree que se van a recuperar los grados de confianza perdida por parte de la ciudadanía europea, la confianza en las instituciones europeas? ¿Se verán resultados que mejoren la calidad de vida de los europeos? Ana Galán le dice, ¿le inquieta que se afiancen los movimientos populistas? Ya la ha respondido, así que seguimos con esta otra.
Trust to the institutions depends from the credibility of the institutions. The biggest problem in political life, in my eyes, are broken promises. If you promise something and you can't keep it, you should not promise something. My experience, I was the mayor of a small city near Aquisgrane in Germany, a city of 40,000 inhabitants, and I was in that time I was the youngest mayor in Germany for a short time. And I learned one thing in my mandate as mayor. People prefer the truth even if it is not nice. They don't like what you tell them, but they don't want that you lie to them. I think citizens honor more when you tell them, even if it is a bad news, you should say the truth instead to make promises you can't keep at the end. And therefore, the credibility of institutions depends exactly from that. Are the institutions able, to be honest? And secondly, can they deliver? And therefore, the credibility of institutions depends from trust, and trust is built on credibility. That you stick to what you promised, or that you explain why you can't promise. You can always say, I promise to do my best. It's better than to promise and than not to stick to the promises. And therefore, my feeling is a lot of this lack of credibility and trust to institutions has to do with this seduction of all politicians, me included. I'm not a holy man. I'm a politician like all the other politicians as well. But my lesson I learned very young is better to say the truth, even if it is not pleasant, and you run the risk to lose. I'll give you an example. My former party leader, the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Gerhard Schröder, for whom I have the highest appreciation, who is a friend, I'm proud that we are friends. Gerhard Schröder told to the Germans what they didn't want to hear, and he lost the election. But Germany had an enormous profit out of it. So I think responsible politicians and institutions must from time to time be courageous. Chancellor Merkel has the big profit of the efforts of Gerhard Schröder. With a certain delay, she recognized it today, that she said, yeah, these are also the successes of my predecessor. But we needed 2 elections later. She was able to recognize it.
Presidente, ¿qué pronóstico puede hacernos de la evolución del conflicto en Ucrania? ¿Es sostenible mantener el bloqueo económico a Rusia sin perjudicar a los Estados miembros, como por ejemplo a España, con intereses económicos claros?
I think, first of all, there is no military solution for the conflict in Ukraine. Secondly, we should not only discuss about sanctions against Russia. My feeling is we should especially discuss about stabilizing Ukraine. The country is more or less bankrupt, and they need economic support, because from time to time my feeling is that the reflection in Moscow is that sooner or later Ukraine will collapse. And they don't need military measures. And therefore, I think we should invest in growth and democracy in Ukraine, and on which is concerning our cooperation with Russia. All diplomatic experiences show that the moment you can convince another side that the common interests are stronger than the conflicts, you have a chance. And I think when we achieve to convince the Russian side that we have common interests, and that it is better to stick to the common interest instead to go ahead with a deeper confrontation, we have a small chance. I saw that today Matteo Renzi, for example, went to Moscow. And that Renzi spoke with Putin about Libya and about the cooperation between the Europeans and Russia to solve the problems in Libya. This could also be an exit strategy for the Russian Federation out of this confrontation, because it is our common interest to have a solution there. That's what I mean. Let's look, first of all, instead to continue to deepen every day on both sides the confrontation, to look, are there common shared interests?
¿Qué valoración hace usted del acuerdo pesquero de la Unión Europea con Marruecos? Le pregunta la diputada Paz Martín.
About
el acuerdo pesquero con
And
Marruecos. Dice,
what's the question?
si piensa usted que cumple con el derecho internacional a tenor de que el caladero del Sáhara Occidental es un territorio no autónomo pendiente de descolonización.
Oye. How much time we have? Look, this is one of our biggest problems. It is one of our biggest problems on the European level. We negotiate with Morocco as a sovereign country, which is our partner. On the other hand, we know about the difficult situation in Western Sahara, and we try to include in the fishery agreement as Europeans that the economic and monetary benefit of those parts of the fishery which happens in front of the coast of Western Sahara should also used to improve the life conditions of Sahrawis. This is the maximum the European Union, in my eyes, can do. And that's what was influencing the debate most in the European Parliament. Therefore, I think it's difficult for me to answer to your question going further than to describe what we discussed and endorsed in the European Parliament.
La última pregunta la hace José Rey. Dice, ¿por qué la Unión Europea no actúa de manera conjunta y más eficaz de cara al Estado Islámico que amenaza no solo a Europa?
I have not the feeling that the Europeans are so divided on what is concerning the Islamic State. My feeling was that we are more or less on the same line, the 28 member states. This is a threat, and I think we defend in this fight an attack on our common values. Therefore, my answer to your question is I have not the feeling that Europe is so much divided about the fight against the Islamic State. We are perhaps divided how to solve our domestic problems on which is concerning our social or societal relationship between the Muslim societies and other societies. It is more a problem of division within the European Union than of the European Union in relation to or related to this question about the fight against the Islamic State.
Yo les propongo hacer un brindis de pie. Señor Presidente, por la Alemania que usted merece y que usted quiere, por la España que todos amamos, por la Unión Europea que necesitamos y especialmente por su futuro.
Gracias. Gracias.